When the Golden Spike joined the rails at Promontory Summit in 1869, America stitched itself together across 1,000 miles of country where a sheriff might be 3 days right away, and trouble always arrived on schedule. The men who worked that iron road learned fast that their only real protection was whatever hung on their belt or waited under the seat. Number 17 on this list wasn't even meant to be a weapon until a desperate man made it one. And number 2 could clear a train car in a single heartbeat. These are the forgotten tools of the most dangerous job in America, carried by men who couldn't afford to wait for the law. Hit that subscribe button before we begin, because the frontier you think you know looked nothing like this. Let's count down. Number 25, the coupling chain. In the years before automatic couplers, the cars of a freight train were joined by heavy iron links, and a spare length of that chain had a way of ending up coiled in a brakeman's kit. Out on a lonely siding, where the nearest marshal was a day's telegraph and a night's ride away, a 2-foot length of case-hardened links became something else entirely. Wrapped around a fist or swung low in the dark of a boxcar, it settled arguments that words could not. Rail yards drew drifters, gamblers, and men running from something, and every crew learned that a fight could start over a dropped card or a stolen bindle. The chain asked no questions and needed no loading. It was simply there, cold and certain, a reminder that on the frontier iron road, a man's tools and his defenses were often the very same thing. Number 24, the long spout oil can. Every locomotive carried a wiper or an oiler, and every oiler carried a brass can with a neck as long as a man's forearm, meant for reaching the hot joints and bearings deep in the running gear. Filled with heavy valve oil, it had real weight to it, and the spout came to a hard point. When a roundhouse quarrel turned ugly in the small hours, that innocent tool swung like a mace, and more than one thief who slipped into an engine cab to sleep woke to the flat of it. Oral accounts from division towns describe oilers who never once fired a gun but were feared all the same, men whose steady hands and quick tempers made the humble can a legend in the bunkhouse. It cost a few cents at the company store. Its true value showed only when the law was too far to matter. Number 23, the coupling pin. The link and pin system that held trains together in the 1870s was as dangerous as anything on the frontier, crushing fingers and taking hands by the thousand. The pins themselves were solid iron, a foot long and heavy in the palm, and brakemen carried spares because they were forever going missing. That same pin, dropped into a coat pocket, made a brutal weapon. Thrown, it could drop a man at a dozen paces. Gripped tight, it turned a fist into a hammer. In the rough end-of-track camps that followed construction west, where whiskey tents outnumbered churches and no sheriff had yet been appointed, the coupling pin was the quiet equalizer of men who worked with iron all day and slept among strangers all night. It was never designed to hurt anyone, but in the hands of a cornered railroad man, it did its work without a sound. Number 22, the track wrench. Section gangs kept the rails true, and the heavy wrench used to turn the bolts on the fish plates was a constant companion, sometimes 3 feet long and forged from solid steel. It gave tremendous leverage on a rusted nut, and the same leverage made it fearsome when a work camp erupted. These gangs were often isolated for weeks, living in boxcar bunkhouses far from any town, settling their own disputes because there was simply no one else to call. A foreman who lost control of a crew of tired, half-drunk men reached for whatever was near, and the track wrench was always near. Its long handle kept trouble at arm's length. Veterans of the section life remembered it not as a weapon, but as an extension of the work itself, the tool that laid the rails by day and now and then kept the peace by night when the peace had no other keeper. Number 21. The spike maul. Ask anyone who swung one and they will tell you the spike maul was the hardest honest tool on the railroad. A long-handled sledge with a slim head built to drive a spike home in a few clean blows. The Gandhi dancers who used it were among the strongest men in the country, and everyone in a track camp knew it. When a dispute in the tent city turned to threats, the mere sight of a spike maul lifted off a man's shoulder was often enough to end it. In places where the nearest jail was 100 miles of open prairie away, reputation did much of the policing, and the men who could drive steel all day carried that reputation in their arms. The maul cost the company $1 or $2 and lasted for years. To the men who wielded it, it was pride, paycheck, and last resort all in one. Number 20. The lining bar. A lining bar was a long steel rod, 5 feet or more, used to shift and align heavy rail an inch at a time. It was unglamorous, back-breaking work, and the bar was always within reach. But that length of solid steel had another life after dark. Swung two-handed, it kept any attacker well beyond arm's reach, and its sheer weight meant a single blow ended most confrontations. Track laborers pushing west across empty territory often went months without seeing a lawman, and they learned to rely on the tools already in their hands rather than wait for help that would never come in time. The lining bar was too heavy to carry casually, so it lived where the men lived, propped by the bunkhouse door. In the folklore of the section gangs, it was the silent guardian of camps that the map had not yet bothered to name. Number 19. The brakeman's lantern. No tool defined the railroad man like the kerosene signal lantern, its flame throwing red or white or green as he swung it along the cars at midnight. Made of heavy tin and glass with a stout wire bail, it was built to survive a fall from a moving train, which meant it could survive a great deal more than that. In a dark coach or a blind baggage car, a lantern swung by its handle became a blazing, blunt weapon, and its sudden light could blind an assailant long enough to turn the odds. Conductors patrolling their trains through lawless stretches of country carried them as much for defense as for signaling. The lantern was the badge of the trade, the thing a boy dreamed of carrying. Few outside the railroad ever realized that the same lamp guiding trains safely home had, on bad nights, cracked more than one skull in the dark. Number 18. The fusee. A fusee was a railroad flare, a paper tube packed to burn a fierce red for 10 minutes or more, tipped with a spike so it could be jammed upright into a wooden tie to warn an oncoming train. It threw sparks, molten residue, and a heat that could not be waved away. A brakeman flagging back along the line at night carried a bundle of them, and in a pinch that burning flare made a remarkable deterrent. No drifter looking to jump a slow-moving freight wanted to close with a man holding a torch that spat fire. In the empty miles between division points, where a stranded crew could wait hours for any help, the fusee did double duty as warning and defense. It cost pennies and burned out fast. But for those 10 bright minutes, it turned an ordinary train man into something no reasonable man wished to test. Number 17. Track torpedoes. These were small explosive caps strapped to the top of a rail so that a passing wheel would set them off with a crack loud enough to alert an engineer a quarter-mile away. Brakemen carried them by the pouchful, and though they were meant purely for signaling, their sudden violence made them useful in other ways. A torpedo tossed at the feet of an advancing troublemaker went off like a gunshot, and in the confusion, a man could gain the seconds he needed. On isolated stretches, where a crew might guard a stalled train through the night With no help within reach, that sharp report served as an alarm that carried for miles. The torpedo was never a true weapon, and no one pretended otherwise. But the frontier rewarded improvisation, and the railroad man who could turn a signal into a scare survived nights that the unprepared did not. Number 16, the pocket slingshot. Long before it became a boy's toy, the slingshot was a genuine tool of the working frontier, a forked stick strung with rubber cut from an old inner tube or a length of surgical tubing. Railroad men carried them to drive off the dogs that haunted the yards and the varmints that raided a line-side camp. But a well-aimed stone from a strong pull could do far more than that. Silent, cheap, and endlessly reloaded from the ballast underfoot, it was the perfect companion for men who could not always carry a gun openly. In rough towns, where a visible pistol invited trouble, a slingshot tucked in a jacket drew no notice at all. It never won a gunfight, but in the hands of a patient man defending his camp after dark, it kept trouble honest and at a distance, one well-placed stone at a time. Number 15, the straight razor. Every man on the line owned one, folded shut in a vest pocket or a kit bag, because a clean shave was one of the few dignities available in a bunkhouse life. But a razor honed sharp enough to take a beard was sharp enough for anything, and it opened faster than a knife could be drawn. In the close quarters of a gambling tent or a crowded saloon car, where the reach of a pistol was more danger than help, the razor became the quiet man's answer. It required nerve and left no doubt. Frontier newspapers of the day carried grim accounts of quarrels settled this way in end-of-track towns that had law only on paper. The razor was never sold as a weapon and never displayed as one. Yet everyone understood what the small, familiar object in a working man's pocket could become when the argument turned and no marshal was coming. Number 14, the blackjack. Also called a sap, the blackjack was a flat leather pouch filled with lead shot and hinged on a springy handle, small enough to hide in a palm and heavy enough to fold a man at the knees. It became the signature tool of the railroad police, the yard detectives known as bulls, whose job was to clear the freights of trespassers along thousands of miles of track no ordinary lawman ever patrolled. A blackjack made no noise and left no obvious mark, which suited work done in the dark corners of a rail yard far from any courtroom. Hobos of the era wrote of the dreaded bulls and their saps with real fear. In a world where the railroad was the only authority for 100 miles in any direction, the quiet leather cosh was, for better or worse, the law itself, carried in a coat pocket. Number 13, brass knuckles. Cast in a single heavy piece to fit over 4 fingers, brass knuckles turned an ordinary punch into something that broke bone. They were cheap, sold openly in general stores and mail-order catalogs, and they slipped into a pocket without a bulge. For a railroad man who spent his nights among strangers in places the courts had not yet reached, they offered a brutal edge in the kind of close brawl that rail towns produced with dreary regularity. Unlike a pistol, they never ran out and never misfired, and a man could carry them into a saloon where guns were checked at the door. The knuckles asked nothing but a clenched fist and a willingness to use it. They were the weapon of men who expected trouble at close range and knew that on the far edge of the map, the first blow often decided everything before help could even be sent for. Number 12, the sword cane. Among conductors and express agents who dressed the part of respectable men, the sword cane offered a gentleman's secret. To all appearances, it was an ordinary walking stick, but a twist of the handle freed a slim steel blade a foot or two long. A conductor moving through his cars, collecting fares, carried real money and real authority, And in the stretches of country where his train was the only civilization for miles, he could not always show a gun without alarming his passengers. The cane drew no attention until the moment it was needed. Catalogs of the late 1800s advertised them plainly, and well-traveled railroad men prized them. There was something fitting about a weapon disguised as the very picture of order and calm. When the cane came apart in a lurching coach at night, it told any would-be robber that the mild man in the uniform had been ready all along. Number 11. The camp hatchet. Practical beyond argument, the hatchet split kindling, drove tent stakes, broke ice on a frozen water barrel, and butchered game for the pot. Every line-side camp had several, and every man knew how to swing one. That familiarity made it a formidable last defense when a camp far from any settlement came under threat in the night. Short enough to carry on a belt and heavy enough to end a fight, the hatchet needed no cartridges and never jammed. The men who built and maintained the railroad often worked a week or more from the nearest town, and they understood that survival meant being ready with the tools already at hand. Oral histories of the construction era described the hatchet as the one object a section man would not be parted from, equally at home preparing supper and guarding the fire. On the frontier, the line between tool and weapon was always thin. Number 10. The Brakeman's Club. Before air brakes, stopping a train meant men running the tops of moving cars in the dark and wind, setting each hand brake by main strength with the help of a stout hickory club levered against the brake wheel. That club, worn smooth by a season's use and hard as iron, never left a brakeman's side. It was also the tool the yard bulls used to drive trespassers off the freights, so common in that role that the men on the receiving end simply called it the club and knew exactly what was meant. In the vast railroad yards that no city police force could hope to patrol, the hickory club was authority made solid. Cheap to replace and deadly in trained hands, it did the work of a badge and a jail across territory where neither existed. Few objects better captured a life where every tool might, on the wrong night, become a weapon. Number 9. The Bowie knife. Made famous decades before the rails went west, the big fixed-blade Bowie was already a frontier legend by the time railroad men carried it. A broad, heavy knife, 8 inches or longer, good for everything from cutting rope to skinning game. Worn on the belt where everyone could see it, it did quiet work simply by being visible, warning off trouble before a hand was raised. In the raucous end-of-track towns that sprang up and vanished as construction pushed onward, a man judged as ready to use his knife was often left alone. The Bowie needed no ammunition and never failed in the cold. For crews that lived and slept a hard day's travel from any court, it offered a plain and honest kind of security. It was a working tool first and always, but its reputation, earned in 100 frontier tales, did much of its defending before the blade was ever drawn. Number 8. The Pepperbox Pistol. An early multi-barrel handgun, the Pepperbox packed 4, 5, or 6 short barrels that rotated to fire in turn, giving a man several shots from a weapon small enough to hide in a coat. It was never accurate past a few feet and had a nasty habit of firing more than one barrel at once, but at the close range of a stagecoach robbery or a saloon car quarrel, accuracy hardly mattered. Cheap and widely sold, the Pepperbox armed clerks, gamblers, and railroad men who wanted more than one chance and could not afford a proper revolver. In the years before cartridge pistols became common, it filled the gap for ordinary travelers crossing dangerous country. On a train stalled in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest help a full day down the line, those few close-range shots could be the difference between a bad night and a last one. Number 7. The Derringer. Small enough to vanish inside a vest pocket, a boot top, or a lady's muff, the Derringer was the ultimate hideout gun, usually 1 or 2 large-caliber barrels meant for a single desperate moment at arm's length. Express agents, conductors, and gamblers riding the rails favored it precisely because no one could see it coming. A robber who had disarmed a man of his obvious pistol often never suspected the second, smaller gun waiting in reserve. It was useless at any distance, but distance was not the point. The point was the surprise, delivered close, when everything had already gone wrong. In the long hours a train spent crossing empty territory beyond the reach of any lawman, that hidden last resort gave its owner a measure of quiet confidence. The Derringer promised nothing more than a single honest chance. On the frontier, a single chance was often all a careful man asked for. Number 6. The Colt Percussion Revolver. Before self-contained cartridges took over, the cap-and-ball Colt, most famously the .36 caliber Navy, was the sidearm that carried countless men through the Civil War and out onto the Western railroads afterward. Loading it was a careful ritual of powder, ball, and a percussion cap, and a wet day could leave it useless. But a well-kept Colt was reliable, balanced, and dependable. Discharged soldiers took these revolvers straight into railroad work, and for years they were the most common serious weapon in a trainman's kit. In the territory, the rails opened faster than any government could follow. A proven six-shooter was worth more than any promise of protection from a distant capital. The percussion Colt was already old technology when the Great Lines pushed west, yet men trusted what they knew. It bridged one violent era and the next, riding west in the holsters of the men who built the road. Number 5. The Smith & Wesson No. 3. This was the revolver that solved the great weakness of its rivals: speed of reloading. Its top break design hinged open and ejected all its spent cartridges at once, letting a man refill and close it in seconds rather than loading one chamber at a time. For anyone who might face more than a single opponent, far from any help, that speed was priceless. The big top break Smith & Wessons earned a fearsome reputation across the West and rode the rails in the holsters of express messengers and lawmen alike. On a train crossing hostile country, where a fight could come without warning and the next town was hours away, the ability to reload fast could decide who walked away. It was a handsome, powerful, well-made gun, and the men who carried one knew they held a real advantage in a world that offered precious few. Number 4. The Sharps Rifle. Where a handgun ruled the close and desperate fight, the single-shot Sharps ruled the long one. Famous as the Buffalo Hunter's rifle, it fired a heavy cartridge with astonishing accuracy at distances that seemed impossible, dropping game and threats alike from hundreds of yards off. Railroad survey parties and hunting crews sent ahead of the tracks depended on it to put meat in camp and to keep danger at a respectful distance across the open plains. In country where a man could see for miles and help was days behind, reach itself was a form of safety. The Sharps was heavy, slow to reload, and expensive, but nothing else touched its power and precision. For the crews pushing the line through the emptiest and most dangerous stretches of the continent, it was the weapon that let them command the ground long before any fort or town arrived to do it for them. Number 3. The Winchester Model 1873. They called it the gun that won the West, and for the railroad men who carried it, the name was earned. Its lever action fed cartridge after cartridge from a tube magazine, letting a single man send a stream of fire downrange without pausing to reload. A staggering advantage in an age of single-shot rifles. A train man with a Winchester across his knees was a match for several attackers at once, and everyone knew it. In the guard cars, the survey camps, and the lonely stations strung across 1,000 miles of unpoliced country, the repeater changed the arithmetic of every confrontation. It was reliable in dust and cold, chambered for the same cartridge as a matching revolver, so a man carried but one kind of ammunition, and it never seemed to run empty at the wrong moment. For crews beyond the reach of any law, the Winchester was law enough. Number 2, the express messenger's shotgun. Inside the express car rode the payroll, the gold, and the bank shipments, and inside that car rode a man whose whole job was to protect them, armed with a short, double-barreled shotgun cut down for close work. At the range of a train aisle or an open car door, nothing on this list was more terrifying. Both barrels, loaded with buckshot, could clear a doorway in an instant, and every would-be robber knew it, which is exactly why so many chose to attack the express car by stealth or dynamite rather than face the messenger head-on. These men often rode alone through hundreds of miles of country where no help could possibly arrive in time, guarding fortune, smalms with nothing but nerve and 2 barrels. The coach gun asked for no marksmanship and offered no second guesses. In the enclosed world of a railroad car, it was the final, decisive word. Number 1, the Colt Single Action Army. Introduced in 1873, the same year the rails and the repeating rifle were remaking the West, the Colt Single Action Army earned every one of its nicknames: the Peacemaker, the Equalizer, the gun that a whole era holstered on its hip. Chambered most famously in .45, rugged, dependable, and beautifully balanced, it became the standard by which every other sidearm was judged. For the railroad man, it was the constant companion, worn on the belt through the yards and the boom towns and the empty miles between, ready in a heartbeat and forgiving of hard use. In territory where the nearest judge might be a week away and every man answered first for himself, the Peacemaker was more than a weapon. It was independence made of steel, the quiet confidence that whatever the frontier sent, its owner could meet it. No tool better captured the age. When the law was days away, this was the law a man carried himself. 25 tools, from a humble coupling pin to the legendary Peacemaker, and every one of them tells the same story. Out where the rails ran faster than the courts could follow, a railroad man's safety was his own to carry. Which of these surprised you most? Tell me in the comments, and if you made it this far, you already know to hit subscribe. The frontier had more secrets than one video can hold, and there are plenty more coming.